welcome to the Crimson Stitchery, a video channel about making all things that are beautiful and useful. My name is Anushka and you can find me elsewhere online on Instagram and Ravelry as A Sour Telling, that's A Sour Telling. And today I'm really happy to be presenting our special edition of the Crimson Stitchery for International Women's Day. And I'm joined at a at-home studio visit by two of my very, very good friends. Here we have Eli and here we have Celine. Do you want to introduce yourself, Celine?
Yeah, so I'm Celine and I make mixed media art.
Okay. And Eli?
I am, I guess, a knitting pattern designer and also a knitting podcaster and a PhD student, and I think that's it. That's the full list.
Yeah, and Eli and I met through knitting.
Yes, we met in a knitting group, I think about 2-3 years ago, and yeah,
in East London. Yeah, we became fast friends, and Celine and I have also been friends. We used to work together. But only for a short period. So first it was work and now it's just pleasure. And we're all doing a little bit of knitting while we talk. Yes. So what are you working on, Eli?
Well, this is my Magnolia cardigan. It's supposed to be a sweater with silk mohair and wool. I'm just using wool. And
what wool are you using?
I'm making a cardigan. This is Norwegian yarn because I'm from Norway, and it's called flannel and it's one of my favorites. And it's quite frankly too thin for this gauge, but it's surprisingly working out really well and becoming a very nice light fabric.
Does flannel mean fine wool?
Yeah. Okay. Or nice wool.
Oh, fine,
yeah.
So fine.
Yeah, nice.
So fine means so nice.
But it could also mean fine, I think. I'm not sure.
Fine in like high quality, or in fine as in fine texture, like thin?
More to do with the quality.
Oh, okay. Like you're so fine, you wool.
Yeah.
It's fine. And what are you making, Celine?
I'm pretending I know how to knit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just gonna make a little flannel today for the time of this video.
Yeah. And I've given you the cotton, which is something that I bought, oh gosh, 14 years ago.
Seriously?
Yeah. I had an idea to make a top. It was a really nice top, but it only exists in my head.
Right.
So now it's going to be transformed.
To wash my face.
Yes.
That's great.
That's much better. That's much better. And I'm just making a sock because I'm always making a sock, but I don't know how much knitting I'll actually get done because I don't think I'm very good at knitting and talking at the same time. Yeah.
It either affects the talking or the knitting, so we'll see.
Yeah, exactly. And but you have done a little bit of knit in some of your installations, haven't you?
Yes, I know how to knit like basic stitch. I can do like rice stitch and traditional stitch, but that's it.
What's rice stitch? Rice?
Rice.
Riz.
Ouais. I don't know in English how you call it.
Maybe it's, how do you do it?
Could be moss stitch.
You do like front, back, and then you invert.
Yeah, so it's called moss stitch or seed stitch in English.
Yeah,
so seed is kind of the same idea as the rice.
The rice, yeah, the little bit.
The little grain. Yeah.
In Norwegian, it's called basically translates to pearl knit, which makes it very confusing because in
Pearl
English,
knit.
purling is purling. Yeah.
Oh, like a pearl.
A pearl.
Like a piece of jewellery.
Oh,
wow.
Interesting.
We've all learned something already, genuinely. Which just goes to show the value of speaking in different languages, actually.
Definitely.
Yeah, because something like that, you know, if it was translated, you would completely lose the original meaning and also the imagery. Because the idea of something being a pearl is like, it's very round and precious. And I find that moss stitch, as it's called in English, is such a hassle to do for me. Yeah. That's not very, well, maybe the finished garment is very precious because I'm so unlikely to do the stitch pattern. But I like the idea of it being rice as well, because there's the idea of rice being a staple, it's a staple food in loads and loads of countries. But it's actually extremely labour intensive and difficult to produce, you know, to grow, to gather, harvest, and then to transport all around the world. So it's kind of like something that's really everyday, but again is quite precious. Oh, that's been really nice to ruminate on that. And so we're all sitting and chatting, and also I'm having a drink. What are you drinking?
Having a bit of a Pepsi, so
yeah. Having a fizzy drink, and I'm drinking a beer because I'm really fancy, so I'm drinking a beer out of a crystal glass that has my name engraved onto it. 18th, what can I say? And now it's perfect to drink a
it.
super fancy beer from a super fancy discount supermarket that I love to go to. And what are you having?
I'm having a coffee from a really nice cup.
Yeah, of a babushka.
Of a babushka, yeah.
I bought that because it reminded me of my mum. I turn it around for the camera, so it's got this funny little babushka face on it, and it reminded me of my mother, which is why I bought the cup. And she was really happy. She wouldn't have bought the same one.
That's cute. I love those dolls that you can. They're the one that you can open.
Matryoshka. Matryoshka. That's right. Yeah. So we're here filming this episode for International Women's Day, and I'm here with my international women. Right, we're kind of forming this temporary girl gang, but I thought maybe we'd talk about first what is International Women's Day, because it's something that's been going on for quite a while, right? And I remember being at school and college and sort of hearing about this thing, International Women's Day, and there'd be events going on and sort of things happening, and I myself never felt the urge to participate actually in any of the events. But have you ever taken part in an event for the day?
I have, but when I was a kid, because at school for Women's Day, as only the girl, they could go and for one day go out and work. Like their dad, they would go at their dad place type of thing.
Okay.
And it's really weird because it was only allowed for girls to do that.
So instead of going to school, you'd go to your dad's workplace?
Yeah, or if it's not your dad, like you go to someone else's workplace for one day.
Does it have to be someone male?
I'm not sure, no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so you do work experience kind of thing?
Yeah. I guess it's to encourage, like, I don't know if it was only for girls. It's really, I think it's really wrong. Which leads to my point of Women's Day, that I feel it's a bit weird that we celebrate women once a year.
Yeah.
Not every day, and we don't think about women's rights all the days.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's sort of an opportunity to condense it into one day, but actually maybe it feels like you have to kind of save it up for one day. What do you think, Ellie?
Yeah, because like we're a woman every day of the year.
Yeah.
And also I guess related to that, I find Women's Day a bit weird how it's kind of dealt with nowadays, because people are treating it kind of like Mother's Day, where it's like, oh, congratulations on Women's Day, here's a card, and it's like,
oh really?
That's like,
yeah. You get a card?
I have not had a card, but like people kind of treat it as such, where they kind of, I guess, congratulate us on being women. I'm not sure.
Do you think it's been kind of commercialised?
Yeah, and it's that approach. It feels to me like it's sort of missing the point of it being to some extent political mark day, where we will discuss. That's certainly what we do in Norway. We discuss women's issues in the media. We will discuss like where we're at with equal pay, things like that, and then you just find that people are just like essentially going happy birthday, you know, and it's not, it feels like missing the point a little bit to me.
I think when I've heard about Women's Day, it's been on radio channels, and it's been a lot of stuff that's been seemed very corporate, like people having power meetings or breakfast meetings and lots of panel discussions about getting women to break the so-called glass ceiling. But also like getting women to work in STEM, in science, technology, engineering and mathematics. Yeah. And sort of this idea that, you know, transcending barriers maybe, but in a very like, commercial, professional, I should say, sphere, rather than the everyday domestic. My question to you is, would you call yourself a woman?
Yeah.
Would you call yourself a woman? I don't know, I feel like a woman describes someone else.
I have that feeling too. I definitely feel like, and I wonder if it's the language thing, that in my transition from a girl to woman, I moved to the UK, and I'm suddenly having to describe myself in English as that, and going back to Norway and using the Norwegian words for that feels very weird to me.
Is it dama?
Yeah, so I find it weird to say, I can happily call myself a woman, but when I'm like, I am a dama.
Okay.
Yeah. It's also spelt like dame, so that's already a little bit.
And what is, do you say kvinna as well?
Yeah, kvinna could be another thing, but in my dialect that's kind of awkward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that mean girl?
Kvinna is woman.
Kvinna is woman and dame is woman.
Yeah, and girl is jente.
Okay, and then what's man?
Man.
Man.
Yeah, same thing.
Man and dame. So actually they're completely different words.
Yeah, which I do appreciate. That it's not like woman in English, which has man in it.
And what about you? Because in French we have une femme.
Une femme, une dame, une fille.
Okay. Une fille is a girl.
Yeah, une fille. And
Une
femme is a woman and dame is a... I'm not sure. To me, dame maybe is more like an adult woman.
Okay.
Dame
mature woman.
No, yeah, maybe.
I like the idea of being a dame. I could be a dame. But then here obviously dame is a title that you'd be awarded.
Yeah. But dame, yeah. But I'm not sure if I'm a woman.
Are you a woman or are you une femme? Like, is there, like, Ellie has a difference, but do you have a difference in French?
I'm not sure we have. I don't feel it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. For me, like being a woman is really linked to being like mature, maybe.
Yeah, me too.
As like I'm into adulthood, which technically I am. But this feeling of like being a woman is quite like something that,
Yeah, that's my kind of hang up with the word as well. It's nothing to do with my issues of like gender, it's to do with my age. Like, am I at that age? Like, I'm nearing 30 actually, so I should be.
I should be.
Right. Yeah, I think of a woman as the women that taught me at school teachers and lecturers. I don't know, but I guess maybe I hang around with a lot of people my own age and older, but I don't hang around with that many people who are younger that might see me differently, possibly. So following on from that and touching on what we've said before, there's sort of this idea of International Women's Day almost being a feminist endeavour as well, especially in what we've talked about women and the workplace, or what you were saying about in your country of birth, it being an opportunity for women to go to see different types of workplaces, and there's that strong association there. So my question to you is, if it is a feminist thing, what even is feminism to you at the moment? Like, is it significant? What do you think it is?
I quite strongly identify with the label. I definitely do.
So you would call yourself a feminist?
Yeah, definitely. With kind of an emphasis on the kind of intersectional approach to that. And it's weird when you asked me about this earlier as well. I was kind of thinking back to where did it all start? When did I kind of take on board this label that is so stigmatized often? Yeah. And it really just kind of boils down to when I was quite young, like still like single-digit age, and I was pretty much the most I must say stubborn, opinionated girl in class, also the biggest girl in class.
Okay.
And being quite clearly communicated to that that's not how you should look, that's not how you should behave, and kind of finding that feminism was something that I could, I guess, take and use to allow myself to be myself. Yeah.
And is that a specifically Norwegian type of feminism? Like, is there any politics or parties or organisations, do you think, that were very much to do with where you grew up?
I don't know. I don't think I was aware of those things at all. I was actually probably more aware of the negative connotations of feminism, and I was like, you know what, I like that. So,
okay. Negative in what way?
Taking space, you know, just demanding your right to exist and be loud and heard. Yeah. And I think also similar to that, as I grew even older and like, you know, into two-digit age and like teenagehood, and I have had a number of friends who at that time would come out as gay, and seeing the sort of struggles that they were facing and how that seemed closely related to issues of gender as well, and like, you know, the ideas of how the feminine and the female is looked at.
Yeah, because they're two different things.
Yeah, so as I started with this like very simple idea of feminism as a child, it's all got broader and broader and broader, which is kind of why I'm embracing the more intersectional approach today, I think.
And what about you, Celine? What does it mean to you? Is it something useful to you?
I think it's a tricky question.
Yeah.
That's implique like lots of different matters, so it's a bit hard to answer just by yes or no.
Definitely.
And like, I don't know, feminism is like an umbrella term as well.
Yeah.
There's so much inside, and there's so much things that still need to be recognized and isn't. But yeah, I guess I'm a feminist.
Okay. And you've also interrogated different feminist artists in your work in terms of who you studied.
Yeah, definitely. Because I don't know, I just, everyone have a different approach of feminism and what does it mean.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's so problematic. Because sometimes maybe we focus too much on debating between the different feminist movement, like this is the correct feminism, this is the wrong feminism, as like maybe it would be worth getting together as all feminists and fight for what we claim we want to fight for, rather than fighting between each other.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's an issue that's not been overcome. And I also think that it's becoming more and more divisive.
Rather than
unifying.
Yeah.
And I think things being divisive at the beginning were needed, you know, like as a wake-up call, to say, actually, when we're talking about feminism and women, it doesn't represent all women, it represents a very particular set of women with particular backgrounds, and therefore the things that are being prioritised, you know, to campaign for relate to certain women. Like the obvious example being, you know, I don't know, childcare and reproductive rights. You know, maybe for some women who have no interest in child rearing, then that's not going to be their priority necessarily. So, you know, there's different arguments to be made. I think, like you, Ellie, I became aware of feminism at school when I was quite young, and I think as I've got older and I've learnt more and more, I've realised that maybe I was a bit naive in thinking that feminism was just about equality, because at the end of the day, the philosophical ideals just can't be detached from the baggage of what accompanies feminism as a movement, as a political stance or group. I think you can't get away from it, and that baggage is exactly what makes feminism really off-putting to a lot of people. But I would say that, I mean, you know, to quote the famous author, we should all be feminists. But also I think, especially in this kind of internet age where you can speak back, you know, we have all got voices and we've all got the abilities to sort of find audiences and harness platforms. We do have the opportunity to redefine what our priorities are and what we're interested in fighting for. I would say that mainstream feminism has been completely tarnished by the TERFs.
Yes, and I am also very much of the mindset of why we're letting the TERFs define mainstream feminism. Like that's just, no, that's like, I'm much happier looking at that than the weird kind of fringe part of feminism that I just think is getting it wrong. Quite frankly.
So the TERFs, just to define the abbreviation, is trans, exclusionary, radical feminists.
Yeah, and I mean they exist, I recognise they exist, I just don't think, at least in my view, they do not define feminism, and certainly maybe it could be very much coloured by the kind of part of feminism that I venture in, is definitely in complete opposition to everything that I have been taught. So
yeah, me too, because that is not about equality.
Yeah, no, it's not, and it's a very limited view of what a woman is that I just can't get on board with at all. And it almost seems part of the problem that we're trying to fight as feminists rather than actual feminists. But I could go on a long tirade about that I'm not going to here.
That's right. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it feels like it's just like creating more division, and that's one of the issues I have into that.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's the same with like, I don't know. Yeah, it's the same as like when you want to answer a solution, and because there's a problem, so you're trying to like make something to answer the solution, when actually you don't need to do that. You need to like rethink why we think this way, and not tackle the problem itself, but try to change the general perception. Does that make sense?
Change this perception of what?
Of this whole issue of like, yeah, feminism, not feminism, and like everyone together.
I think it's also like, yes, it's true, like the whole thing about it's divisive, but it's also one of the ways that I want us to look at the diversity within feminism, to see that it's not all this monolith thing, like it's not the same. That I often, I think everyone who calls themselves a feminist has this experience when they talk to someone who does not identify as such, and they will be faced with the straw man or the straw woman feminist.
What's
who
that?
is that, like this some archetype feminist that doesn't represent any of us, I don't think, and then we have to answer to that. And it's just no, I'm not like that, and it doesn't. Yeah,
because my argument is that we can recognise difference. We can view a group as, instead of inherently homogenous and all the same, we can view a group, we can make a group and imagine it as heterogeneous, and imagine it as multiplicity. You know, we can imagine a group as actually it's an assemblage of people who are not necessarily all the same, and all of their differences can add to the strength of what we're trying to achieve together, which is equality.
I definitely have something to add to that, coming from my psychology background, because I'm a psychology PhD student and I lecture in social psychology.
Okay.
And there's one kind of sort of become established truth within the research now, that there is this idea of an in-group and an out-group. The in-group is the group that you're part of. It could be your nationality, your gender, your something you identify with, your religion, something. And the out-group is another group that you're not part of. So it could be me being a Norwegian, that's my in-group. You being British could be the out-group that I'm not part of. That's an example. In this case would be feminist, right? We are feminists, we're the in-group. And the thing, when you're in the in-group, you see a lot more diversity than you see in the out-group. We sort of simplify the out-group. We see it as less diverse, we see it as more monolithic. And so I think we have an easier time to see how diverse feminism is, and how it's so different and often in complete opposition to itself.
I see, because we have taken the time, we invested in actually looking into it deeply, rather than just writing it off and saying, oh no, that's not for me. And I think also, when I've ever spoken to normally actually younger girls, teenage girls, and they've said, oh no, feminism, that's not for me. And I said, well, do you not think you should be paid the same amount as, you know, your brother or your male friend? And they said, well, of course. So continuing on, we've just had a costume change / project change. We all got enough refreshments? All right.
Yeah,
so to continue our discussion on International Women's Day, let's talk about what we're doing now, and also what we do for our, you know, profession, livelihood, income, compulsion, have to do it, which is the role of handcrafts and hand making today, which is something that has just been continually, completely associated with women for probably about the last 200 years or so. Yeah. There's often, it seemed to be this division between the domestic and the professional spheres. And when things are out in the professional spheres, they are less gendered. And when it's done at home, it becomes women's work. But actually, women's work done at home in terms of knitting, but you know, embroidery, a lot of the time women were doing work at home that they would then sell as well, so it would become a source of income, which it has for you, right?
For sure.
So do you think that this really, do you agree with me? Do you think that there is this dichotomy between like professional and domestic that's gendered still today? I mean, you're doing textile art, is that predominantly female as well, even when it's in art?
Definitely. And like you can just see that on like university. I'm finishing my master now, and like we're almost all female. And on my BA we're almost all female. And when there is some men, like most of the time they aren't straight, and that's something as well. That's where are the men?
Yeah.
Like, why?
I found that as well in the past when I worked in theatrical costume in a variety of roles, from designer and supervisor to maker, and dresser, wardrobe person, it's been predominantly women, and if there have been men, they have been gay.
I mean, I can only speak for knitting, that's kind of only my kind of area of expertise, and I find the same thing, like we are mainly women, and when there are men, usually there are gay men. There are exceptions to this, but there's
always exceptions.
Always. Yeah, of course. But everyone has in common that we are less invested in our masculinity. Yeah, I think.
Or maybe it's kind of like hegemonic forms of masculinity. I also think that what's happened quite a lot is that women's work and handcrafts have been quite devalued in society, historically speaking, and they're extremely popular now that they've been rebranded as an activity of leisure and luxury. Whereas actually, if you look at the history of people doing things with their hands, making things, I think it's a really universal human compulsion. It's what you find that's interesting in archaeological digs, like it's little bits of pottery that show people doing things. Just that act of creating, which really is for everybody. Like, I wasn't taught to knit by my family because they were not big knit. No one was really big knitters, but my mum was quite good at crochet. But everybody enjoyed it, and I never saw that there was any kind of barrier to entry for me as someone that doesn't come from a strong culture, heritage, tradition, country of knitting like you. It was just something that I enjoyed doing, and other people in my family were like, oh, that's really cool that you're doing that. So actually in my family it was actually very valued, even though no one was a professional knitter.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to compare with where I'm coming from, because literally as soon as we were gathered around the dining table and sofa and just kind of relaxing in the evening with some coffee, then the women would take out their knitting, but it would be a certain generation, right? And they just never even consider that. Maybe that was something they would want to pass on to me even, but none of them ever taught me to knit. I picked it up in school. And it was a completely domestic thing that they did, and never a money maker or anything. It's just the thing that you do for your family members mostly.
Okay. So why do you think it is that they didn't want to teach you? Did they assume that you weren't interested?
To be fair, like if they had tried to teach me without me wanting to, I probably would have resisted, because you can't make me do anything. But I just don't think it's that often passed down, because we know we are in a bit of a generational change with women entering the workforce and stuff. Like that's pretty much the clear separator, the way I see it.
Yeah. And then that define this thing between the craft and the work, like because in my family it was the same. My grandmother, she would do all the craft, and my mom refused to be taught by her mom because she wanted to like go on and not stay at home to do the female stuff type of thing. Which it makes sense on a generational point of view, but then it seems really sad.
Absolutely, it makes complete sense that was their reaction. And also I think there is to some degree the idea of making a very clear distinction between generations as well, so exactly not doing what your mum did. And for me, I guess my mum didn't knit, my mum did crochet, so I guess I didn't do crochet because maybe I didn't want to do the same as her, I don't know. Maybe, but I think that there has been a massive reclaiming of so-called women's arts, women's domestic arts, but there's this difference between what is done as craft in the home and what is done in the professional sphere as business or design, and also what is then transformed and considered an art, an art form, and then even within that, like you're a textile artist, not a textile crafts person, that's a massive divide there, and even within that it's still hugely gendered.
I think it's interesting that we said earlier as well, is that as soon as you can sort of put the label craftsmanship on it, you get it looks less gendered.
Right. Craftsman, or like the artisanal.
As soon as it's like becoming a bit it gets a certain status or becomes a bit of a money maker thing, then it's less gendered. It was the same thing when knitting machines were introduced, and when there was a transition from hand knitting to machine knitting, then suddenly a lot more men got involved because it was more to do with the machinery, and yeah, you saw a change in the kind of the genders that were involved in knitting.
Definitely, and of course there are, you know, plenty of men that are involved in knit, but in fibre production generally, in a worldwide sense, in terms of fibre development of new fibres, or changing properties, or developing different types of dye, you know, designing and operating machinery, running factories, right? There's more of a balance almost on like the very technical, like almost like going into engineering and science kind of side of things. But then when it comes to the consumption of textiles, you know, their symbolism as sort of being laden with I would say, you know, the female, rather than femininity, but just, you know, ideas of the female are so strong that it's really hard to transcend it. And they're so strong that they infiltrate completely different industries and also spheres, like, you know, home, but as well work.
I think one thing that's also interesting, I'm thinking back to my first comment that, you know, in my family there was a generational change. But then I'm thinking back, it's not true that only the very old were knitting and then there was a gap. That's not actually true.
Okay.
There were people, my kind of mums and aunts generation were knitting, but only if they had children. So this, as soon as they became pregnant, that's pretty much when they would have picked up the knitting and become capital K knitters. That's a very clear before and after now that I'm looking back at it.
That's really interesting. So it's when they themselves fell pregnant.
Yeah.
So I found with quite a lot of friends who aren't like capital K knitters, like probably you and I are, they do a lot of knitting if someone they know is having a baby. Like I've got a good friend who's made the most exquisite and huge baby blankets, all knitted, all on straight needles as well, so you can kind of imagine like the physical labour as you're knitting something massive on straight needles, like, you know, the weight of it all.
Circulars.
Technological change with circular needles.
Oh my days.
Very good point. So she's, you know, and other friends have said, oh, I've always made something for, you know, always made baby booties, but I've never made anything for myself. So what is it about, like, the baby that's bringing out this textile production, you know, this kind of churning out of which baby stuff?
I'm now thinking, again, this relates back to this concept that we talk about a lot in the online knitting community, which is about selfish knitting. We don't like using the word because it's got a negative connotation. We're kind of using it a bit cheekily.
Can you explain it?
Selfish knitting is kind of what we refer to the knitting we make for ourselves, but not in a way that we genuinely think we're being selfish, but more so saying, you think I'm selfish knitting for myself? Okay then. Kind of reclaiming it a little bit, but it's interesting how it actually has been seen as selfish as soon as you're actually not knitting for family members, for the babies, when you're actually just doing this domestic craft for yourself.
No, do you think that actually knitting is very linked, or like craft is very linked to making things for others rather than to make for yourself?
It seems
like giving away.
To me, the kind of experiences I've had, it seems to directly anger someone. The very idea that you will only do this for yourself, that you're like only knitting for yourself, buying yarn for yourself, like generally just the me show starring me that doesn't actually involve other people. Like one of the first questions that you get when you are knitting is, oh, who's that for?
I've been making a sock for my partner, who is a man, and been asked by strangers on the tube, oh, what are you knitting? Is it for a baby? And I'm like, no, it's for a man.
Don't tell him anyone said that, but socks for him.
Well, it's not about him, it's about the person's assumptions that, you're creating it for someone else. And actually, when I first started knitting when I was a teenager, everyone in my family was so enthused about my knitting that they all wanted knitted Christmas and birthday gifts, and I was happy to oblige because, you know, it feels nice when someone appreciates what you're doing.
Oh, and if they want it, then yes.
Yeah.
If they really
really want it, which they really did. And just for years I had nothing for myself because I would be giving it away all the time.
Yeah, I got that with a friend of mine as well, like until maybe last year or something, she decided, I am now going to start knitting for myself. Like she only knitted for her children pretty much, and when she actually started knitting for herself, that's when I paid attention to what she was making, because I'm like, you know, it could have been for me hypothetically, and I'm like, wow, you're a really good knitter, and I can't believe you're only just now knitting for yourself. Like yeah, it's really good.
Do you think in your sphere, which is quite different in textile art, that it is accepted generally that the artwork is about the artist, or do you think that there is this idea of it speaking to, you know, all women, or, you know, kind of being about the audience?
Can you reframe?
Is it acceptable that, like, as an artist, your art is about yourself when it's in textile art? Or is it meant to be about, like, a product or an idea? Do you like something more universal?
Rather than just about me.
Yeah.
But then your question is more about like what art is made for and what kind of message is made to convey, right?
Sure, and in your genre as well, in your field and your genre.
Well, I guess when you make art, it's like the perception of the art, the perception of the world through the eyes of the artist.
Okay.
But that's more general. It's not especially about art, right?
But is that an accepted, you know, point that is brought into your field and your department?
I guess so.
Mm-hmm.
I guess so. But the thing is, like, although I don't really I use textile, but I don't consider myself as a textile artist.
Oh, sorry. You should have corrected me.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But it's just like I use textile as a media, but I don't really create. I don't create new textile, and I don't actually use lots of crafts. Does that make sense?
Apart from really exquisite handmade samples of fabrics and dyes that you make by huge amounts of skill.
Yeah.
I mean, don't downplay what you do, which is really beautiful and also highly bespoke.
Yeah, no, it is, of course, but I don't know, for me it's not, I don't see that as a craft.
Okay, right.
Maybe it's more that, yeah.
But you are using craft techniques.
I am, but I don't see that as being craft, because I don't know, my representation of craft is more like coming from like, it's like a beautiful thing that you would make and that has a usage maybe, or no,
has a use.
No, it doesn't have a use. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't know. I see craft as being something really respectable and something really
that you respectable.
Yeah, no, but like something that you need to show respect to, because the people that have the knowledge of the craft, they're the one that run the world, basically. I'm not run the world, but like they're the one that like.
No, I think the patriarchy run the world.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. It does, but like the people that know how they have the knowledge of the crafts. They're the knowledge of they know what they're doing, basically.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful and amazing, and not everybody have access to this amount of skills and knowledge. Therefore, it's something really that you need to acknowledge and is respectable.
Definitely, craft is definitely about knowledge and skill and kind of like working intelligence, like intelligence of materials.
It's a big focus on materials, definitely.
Yeah. And but I would argue that you do have very deep skill, and also from your background training, you know, you do have very deep skill, and that is brought into what you do.
Yeah.
Because you're not like, you know, some contemporary artists that don't do anything, or they have their assistant do something, and the fact that their name is attached to it transcends it and makes it into art. Like, that's not the case for your practice. Like, your stuff is really interesting and is very intellectual as well as kind of beautiful to look at. Well, sometimes not beautiful, but sometimes challenging, but like always intricate, I would say.
Yeah. True.
But I agree, like it's not, but maybe you're saying it's not craft because it's not domestic, or because you want to go into the arts field, or do you think?
Yeah, I think it's more because of that, yeah. No big mix, I don't know, it's confusing.
It is.
It's confusing. I don't think I have one standing point of view on that right now.
It's interesting to reflect over, though.
Yeah,
so
no,
that
definitely.
Really big question of arts versus craft, which there's not really ever an answer to, I don't think.
It's a massive question, and people have written a lot of books
Yeah.
arguing to and forth, but I guess I'm interested in hearing what your personal interpretations are in your completely different backgrounds, different fields, and actually different practices, but which can put under the umbrella terms, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what you were saying, is when you start interrogating the group, you realise how much difference there is and how completely fascinating it is too.
I think it's really awesome to acknowledge all that stuff.
So kind of going back to your practice, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that your work responds to the situation of you living in London, not being from London, kind of idea of like temporary spaces, existences, and has quite like a utopian vision. It's very hopeful about building better ways of living and better ways of being.
Yeah, definitely. But I don't think especially London is more like responding to the environment I am in. But this happened in London now.
Yeah. But exactly, like responding to the environment.
Yeah.
But it's I feel like it's quite like grounded in maybe almost like a sense of displacement, like the tent projects that you've talked about and so on. And actually also your work is quite similar, about the idea of being from elsewhere with a very interesting tradition and bringing it here, and how do you reinterpret it, or how does it change relevance or change, context being in London?
Definitely.
And I found quite interesting how like craft is like linked to culture, or at least it is for me.
Yeah.
Because the craft I do, like I bring some like Swiss craft into what I do, and it's part of like my heritage, and in a way like, or at least in my work, I feel maybe some kind of like nostalgia, and when I can do that, I can like feel better, like use the craft now, to like keep some kind of like cultural tradition in the work.
And that's definitely what you're doing as well.
Yeah, that's definitely where my whole like knitting thing came from, because yes, we were taught to knit in school and stuff in Norway, but it was pretty much around the time I moved to London and I started to get a little bit homesick and very nostalgic about knitting. And then once I came home and I saw all the colourwork jumpers and mittens that you see every day in Norway that I hadn't seen for that past half a year that I spent in London, and it got me very nostalgic, and I immediately wanted to cast on all those things and start knitting them. But then when you bring that to London, it just so happens that nowadays anything Scandinavian is just the hottest thing, and I live in East London where it's particularly trendy, and so whilst I'm just like indulging in my own nostalgia, it's really hitting home for people in terms of what is currently in vogue, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that idea of that nostalgia, that idea of like, ideal world of knitting is something, it's quite heavily associated with handwork, especially in an age of mass-produced garments. But it's interesting how you're talking about discourses of fashion and style and what becomes fashionable, then completely transcends the associations that existed before, and also in your home country.
Yeah, and you kind of see things being used in a way that they maybe wouldn't have been traditionally in Norway, and to some extent I kind of applaud that as well. Right, with the kind of traditional saddle mittens, they were very particular about what was a men's mitten and what's a woman's mitten. Like a woman's mitten can be ribbed or lace, but a man's mitten will have a colourwork cuff.
Oh, a lady could be lacy?
Yeah, so but men could not have a lace cuff, just women. Right, but
no, lace is too good for men.
Right, but in my own designs I'm like, that's nonsense. I want to have a colourwork cuff.
Do you think that because lace was seen as feminine?
Probably.
Which is interesting because when you look at like 17th century portraits, of the kings, it's all about the lace cravat, the lace cuffs. And actually going back to what you were saying about craft and cultures, I think a large part of the portraits of all of those rich French and English kings with all the lace, is that because of where the lace came from as well? Like you hear a lot about Flanders lace, there's lots of lace traditions in kind of northern central Europe, so it almost becomes like a nationalistic effort as well, of like, the national product, whether it's lace or whether it's, fine wool.
I think also the Serbe mittens in particular are strongly linked with wedding traditions in Norway. So the bride will often have to kind of prove her kind of wife skills with basically showing how good she was at knitting mittens. So she'd have to make mittens for pretty much every person in the to-be husband's family, and she had to have her own mittens at some point. People had this idea of church mittens, which, you know, your Sunday mittens, and they had to be even nicer, so the lace would often come in there. This is a little bit just from recollections, I might not get everything completely right, but kind of roughly it's more revolved around that, and so it's about looking extra nice sometimes.
Looking extra nice.
Yeah, having your Sunday mittens.
Yeah. And nowadays those kind of traditions are not necessarily so entrenched.
No, right? You will see people use those kinds of things in completely different contexts, and you see it kind of simplified a bit, and you'll find it in shops like Primark and stuff. You know, it's like a completely different presentation, and people in the streets of London wearing it, and I'm like, I am very happy seeing things transform and kind of take on a life of its own, and
like particular motifs being used across different categories of garments, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really cool. I like when we can recognise it though, and kind of go, oh, you see that that guy wearing that? He probably has no idea, but that pattern, that's not that thing. And like I enjoy being able to know these things. I don't want that knowledge to disappear, but I'm also happy for things to take on new purposes.
I think what we've touched on quite a lot is the notion of travel and movement. So at the moment we're talking about the travel of motifs kind of symbolically around different parts of Europe and different fields. But also there's the idea of, you know, the fibres, the products moving around, but also there's the idea of us moving around. Like, I am a British person and you two are Europeans of different parts of Europe. I also have family, you know, around the other side of the world, and for me, travel, I mean, people say to me, oh, it's so exciting, you've been to Malaysia, that must be amazing. But when I go to Malaysia, it's not to do tourism, it's to visit people, you know, it's to visit my great-grandmother while she was alive, it's to visit my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, and it's not tourism, you know, on the sort of relaxing, glamorous scale necessarily, it's more like a trip. And there's also the idea that, yeah, for many people travel is a luxury that they might not be able to afford, but for other people travel is a necessity, and it's something that they will do, it's what they will spend on. Like, my grandmother goes to Malaysia at least once a year for Chinese New Year to visit and spend time with her family and to maintain bonds. And now, you know, thanks to technology, it's much easier for us to all do that. But also, I think it's important to physically engage in that as well, not just in a virtual sense.
For sure. I mean, it's become a way of, I mean, I'm not as well travelled as I'd like to be, but I definitely travel more and more now than I have ever done in the past, and it's definitely a way of directly engaging with the world and seeing it and how it's very different from suburban Norway.
Right.
And that's done me good, I think. Yeah.
And what about you? Do you feel settled in London?
Can anyone feel settled in London?
I don't know.
I don't know if London's the place for the settled.
I don't know. But I remember when you first met me and my partner, you were really surprised and you said we were the first people that you'd met that were from London.
I think I said the exact same thing.
You said the same thing. Yeah. And our families are from London. This is where we're from. Yeah. You know, this is where we're from.
Yeah.
That annoying question.
Oh yeah. And it's like, this is a really kind of, you know, question you should be careful about, you know, where you're from, but it's a very common question in London, because the vast majority of people you will meet in London will not be from London. And yeah, that's a thing to kind of reflect over. Like, I did have that a knitting meetup a couple of weeks ago, and I met this woman and could clearly hear from her accent that she wasn't from London, but I think unless we got to know each other better and have that rapport, it's not something I'll probably ask, but it's often a way of getting to know people in London, just because we come from all over the world.
But there's a way to do that without being offensive or showing your ignorance.
But why is it offensive to ask where you're from?
Because it's suggesting that you're not from here, whereas I am from here.
Yeah, I think people need to take your answer for it. If you say you're from London,
Yeah.
you take that as the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, thank you. That's been the most enlivening discussion. Yeah, ever. And better than like a high flying breakfast meeting. It's 7 a.m. in the city of London. I've enjoyed that. Thank you for coming to my little pad.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, studio home visit at the Crimson Stitchery. Do you have any last words you want to say? Do you want to do a plug?
I have a podcast as well. I'm Skeindeer Knits on YouTube as well, and I'm Skeindeer on Instagram. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to plug?
No, the only thing I can say is I managed to knit this little thing over this discussion. I'm really proud of myself because I don't really know how to knit.
That's not true. You do know how to knit.
I know how to knit, but I'm not an experienced knitter as you guys.
Obviously are an experienced knitter. I mean, you just picked it up and away you went. You do know how to knit.
I know how to knit, yeah. But that's great. That's great. Very happy about that.
Wonderful. And is it going to be beautiful and useful?
Indeed, as everything they make.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please feel free to leave me a comment. Respectful comments only, I will say. Yeah, just a little bit of internet paranoia there, right?
Yeah, that doesn't go away.
Yeah. Please, respectful and polite comments only.
Otherwise we'll be sad.
Yeah, exactly.
That's invited.
Don't make us sad on purpose. Okay. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed, please do subscribe to my channel. I do a monthly vlog chat show where it's solo, and then I'm hoping to do more exciting and collaborative endeavours in the future. If you want to follow me elsewhere, on Instagram I'm a sourtelling, which is a sourtelling, and the same on Ravelry. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, happy women and international to you.